Thank you very much for that great introduction. I appreciate you all being here today. Howdy. Hey. Just call me Gordon. I use the doctor to get past the secretary or the gatekeeper. Okay, so everybody I actually ended up talking to, just call me Gordon. But I am a South Carolinian. I live in South Carolina, but I do all of our work in Augusta. So I live right across the river in North Augusta. Took me about 2.5 hours to get down here, and it was kind of cool actually, because normally you go the highway or the back way to get to the highway to come in, and I had forgotten that I set my map to no highways. So it ended up taking me through the Savannah River National Lab area, came the back ways, and then I started coming into Savannah. I realized I wasn't getting on any of the highways. I didn't even get on 17 to come over the cool bridge. I was looking forward to that. And I realized that I had that setting on there. So I came the back way even all the way down through town. But it was fun. I think I saw a panther run across the road in the National Lab area. If you've ever driven down that road, National Lab's on both sides of the highway. It goes right down the middle of it. So I have to find out that. But it looked like a big cat. A lot bigger than any pet cat. But anyway, we're here to talk about money, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. Is anybody working on any projects with blockchain or cryptocurrency today? You guys know anybody who is? Yeah? You guys own anybody own Bitcoin? Some Bitcoin? 2 people. Any other cryptos? You might not like Bitcoin. So. Ethereum, yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be talking about all that today. So. And I'll try to stay on task. A lot of times, I could talk forever about this stuff, so I'll try to whip through it pretty quickly. So first of all, just a little plug about Palmetto Chain. Basically, we started off with the idea of creating a utility in South Carolina on the blockchain so that all South Carolinians would have access to it, and we will still work to do that. But came up with the idea about this time last year. And the federal regulators just really haven't created an environment that allows a national methodology for creating these new types of innovations without not knowing whether we're going to get in trouble later on about it. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that in a minute. So what we're doing in South Carolina through Palmetto Chain now is actually developing legislative proposals, finding the guys in the legislature to sponsor the legislation and get it passed to help make South Carolina a more blockchain and cryptocurrency friendly state, because it looks like the states are leading the federal government in this. Wyoming and Colorado have already made their environments very easy. In the U.S., if you want to go and set up a cryptocurrency, the best bet is for you to set it up in Wyoming today, because they technically protected you, safe harbored you from the regulations around that for at least to be based in the state. You'd still have to deal with each state if you do business in each state. So that's the only thing about that is, okay, well, I can do it in Wyoming, but what if my business is not in Wyoming? So anyway, that's what we're doing there. Georgia should do that. I don't know if anybody is doing that, but I believe we're in what we call the 5th industrial revolution, and this is where it all happened. So the industrial revolution, which I really don't consider a milestone because it evolved over 100 years in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and all they were doing was adopting machines to do the work. Until Henry Ford invented the industrial assembly process, when we could actually scale on that technology. I believe that was really the biggest innovation that then started leading us into all these different revolutions. And then, of course, the computer in the 40s and 50s, the internet in the 60s and 70s, and then Tim Berners-Lee creating the World Wide Web in the 80s, and it propagated in through the 90s and into today what we do. And so I believe that blockchain is the next version of that. And get into that because the way that I look at the Internet 3.0, the first version of it was the .com. That allowed us to publish content. So everybody put up their website, talked about their companies, or they were started to post articles and share files and do all that stuff. And then phase 2 was when social media, so Facebook, before that MySpace, and some of those platforms were in place for people to share and exchange their content easier than what it was with just the World Wide Web. And now today, through blockchain, we're actually exchanging value. And that's the main key of blockchain in relationship to the Internet. Okay? And it will change our world in fundamental ways, and we'll get into that. So basically, because of the blockchain, we can build distributed markets that are secure and really emphasize the ability to create trust. And we're going to dive into that in more depth in a minute. And then, if you're into crypto, especially if you were into crypto in the, from 2010 or, from 2008 up until about 2015, you were probably a libertarian, and you were all into decentralization, meaning you wanted everything to be anonymous so that you could do whatever you wanted to do on the Internet, right? And so, but the market would not proliferate because Joe Plumber would not adopt it because it's not, quote unquote, sanctioned by the government, or there's no way that a government can see into that type of system. So now the governments are starting to create regulations that then lend credibility to everybody who then feel more comfortable using this technology. And then being able to source any kind of information, source any kind of value, tracking that value, making sure that those who you're interacting with are legitimate. You don't necessarily have to know who they are, but along the way their identity was established, and then it was turned into something that's credible. And because of where we are now with this technology, most CEOs are actually have teams looking at how they can leverage this technology because they want to make sure they're on the front end of the curve as opposed to when the Internet came into play really heavily in the 90s. And so most of them believe that they're going to adopt some level of blockchain technology into their operations or take advantage of it from a business model standpoint. Just in the banking industry, which is what cryptocurrency is really truly affected mostly in first, if they quit resisting it and actually adopt it into their operations, it's projected that they could save $8 to $12 billion just in operational savings by leveraging this technology. Gartner predicts that by 2030 it'll be a 3.1 trillion market cap industry, market capitalization. And then blockchain solutions just for this year, 2.1 billion in, and this is in value, not in cost and not in revenue. But the total spend by 2022 will be about $9.7 billion. So there's a lot of opportunity here. As a matter of fact, one company, does everybody know Kodak? Does everybody know what Kodak's problem was? They were in the film industry, and it took them a really long time before they figured out that film was going away and becoming digital. So their market cap, they filed bankruptcy and they went down. Well, last year in late 2017, they announced that they were developing a blockchain solution for their digital film division, and their market capitalization went up by 117%. So the people who are in the know, that know this technology is coming down, are looking for their companies to adopt it into their operations. And I'll show at the end, I'll show you all the big players here. So this is a quote from the Chief Technology Officer at a bank, Royal Bank of Scotland. So basically, you know, they're looking at ways that they can compete, right? Unlike the internet that people adopted to make their processes more efficient, what these companies are looking at is how can they change their business model. And this is what blockchain, what we believe blockchain can do for companies, is actually allow them to create new business models for doing what they want to do and serving their customer and generating revenue at a lower cost. Okay? And another key concept to understand is disintermediation. And so we recognize this in the Amazon example. So Amazon disintermediated the middleman first in the brick and mortar and then in distribution. As a matter of fact, they're starting up their own shipping company to compete directly with UPS and FedEx, and then, you know, turning all their servers into a web services company and bypassing all the big data server companies. So basically what this means is we don't have to have an intermediator who is centralizing the process through them in order to create trust, so that the users feel confident that what they're buying or how they're getting service is legitimate. And that's what blockchain does. So basically the way that the network is set up, and I'm going to get into this in detail later, is that peers on the network are validating the transaction, so that, you know, the network knows that the identity of the person was validated and that they can see the transaction occurring and that all the parameters of the transaction were executed and validated, so that then the money can be exchanged, or the value can be exchanged is really what's happening. So for example, use a college. Anybody transferred from one college to another? So your new college has to get your permission, and well, you give permission to your old college to send the transcripts directly to the new college. You don't get to see them, right? So and that's the old scenario. In the blockchain base, what your former college would do is place the transcripts on a blockchain solution. It's all validated. They can't ever change it. They can add to it, but they can never change that information. So now that's where the trust gets created. So now instead, when you're going to the new school, instead of having to ask permission for them to send it over here, you have control over access to that information because it's validated as legitimate already. Then your new school, all they have to do is you just grant them access to it. And they have confidence, because it's on a blockchain solution, that it's real. Okay? So that's just a real brief example. But you know, what is blockchain? I've been talking a lot about blockchain. So really what we have to do is go back to digital currency, or money in general. That then over the years of the computer age has turned into digital cash, and then now, because of blockchain, known as cryptocurrency, and I'll dive into all that. So money, I'm just going to go back and give us a history lesson on money, right? So basically money is a measuring stick. And really, it's not, the money itself is not the value. It's measuring a value, okay? And so the item itself can't really be a part of the measuring stick. You could say that gold coins would be, but really at the end of the day, what you'd be trading is the value of the coin, of the gold, if it's higher than the denomination of the coin. Okay, so it really doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, I've got 35,000 1967 dimes. as reserve pre-1967 dimes. Why? Not because they're worth 10 cents, but because the silver in the dime is now worth about $2.10. So those dimes are now worth $2.10. And the reason I have them in dimes is because they're small enough to ultimately trade if whatever happens, happens, right? So I won't be trading the value of the dime as a dime. I'll be trading the value of the silver at whatever its price is traded for whenever I need to use it. So that's what we're talking about here. And at the end of the day, what is money? Money is valuing, is the measure of your time. Okay, so you're going to get paid based upon what you've agreed your time is worth with whoever's paying you. Okay, so you know, if you get a job, right, you're either going to get paid an hourly wage or you're going to get paid an annual wage. You've locked in the value of your time when you do that. Creative time is different in that creative time, so however much time it takes you to invent or create a software program or paint a painting or create a sculpture, is all then going to be based upon the buyer. Okay, so whoever said that, okay, that's worth $10,000. It doesn't matter how long it took you. You could have done it in, I mean, these guys that get up there and do these things in 35 seconds and still sell it for $10,000. I mean, that's, you know, somebody's valuing that at $10,000. And then, of course, the supply and demand. So here's a little way I look at value. So in 1962, one night at a Motel 6 was $6, which is where they got the name. In 1962, an ounce of gold was worth 35 bucks. So an ounce of gold would basically buy you 6 nights at Motel 6. Okay. Today, Motel 6 is $69. The value of an ounce of gold is $1,200 bucks. So that will buy you 17 nights at a Motel 6. So what happened? Did the value of gold go up, or did the value of Motel 6 go down? Both, or either, right? So it all depends upon where you view the value. And you can do that with anything, by the way. So before we had coins, we bartered. So I'll trade 2 chickens for your pig or whatever. Then in China, a replica was basically just something that was identified to create some type of value for when you were trading. And it could have been a bone or a rock or one of those types of things. And in China, even though they invented the idea of the replica, it wasn't standardized across the whole country. It was all just an idea based, and then local areas then figured out which one they wanted to use. Okay. The one that became a coin was in Lydia, which is a part of the Middle East, and that was 600 BC. And then the first gold coin was minted in 1250 in Florence. Basically, they just stamped the city seal on it, the city seal on the coin, and that became their mark for trading value in Florence. The first banknote was Bank of Sweden in the 1600s. And you probably don't realize this, but the first digital currency was Western Union. So does everybody know Western Union? So they were started when the telegraph was invented. So you're in California, you want to send money back to your family in New York. You gave your money to the Western Union office in California, and then they got on the telegraph and coded it over to New York. And because it's on that, you know, they did what they did to say this is a secure line, this is credible and all that. And then the New York Western Union would give whoever you're giving the money to at that office, okay? So technically the first digital currency was created in 1860. And then the first credit card by John Biggins at the Diners Card was the most prevalent. The first independent digital money was created when the internet, much later when the internet was created, and that was called e-gold. I'll talk a little bit about why they didn't survive. The first peer-to-peer network, so when we started putting computers and allowing people to access somebody else's computer for data, like Napster, so you could go out and grab movies and music from somebody else's computer for free. So web money started then, but they're dead also. And then in 1999, Milton Friedman predicted, he's an economist, Nobel Prize winning economist, he predicted that because of the internet, there would be an e-cash that was legitimate and standardized at some time in the future. He didn't give a prediction on when. Another company started in 2006, and then Perfect Money in 2007. So why did these initiatives fail or bust? And the main reason is this. It's called the double spend. So if you have a digital currency that's ones and zeros, right? Computer code, you can copy that computer code and duplicate it, right? Which is how Microsoft became billions of dollars worth, because they created an application and then they copied the digits and they put it on a floppy disk, and then they sold the heck out of it, right? So the problem with digital currency, digital cash at the time, was there was no way to figure out how to not have a double spend problem. So then nobody trusted it, okay? So it just didn't work. And so Milton Friedman's realization, prediction finally was realized in 2008 when Satoshi Nakamoto. Has everybody heard that name before? Satoshi? Does anybody know who Satoshi is?
Bitcoin.
Well, he or they created Bitcoin, right? So nobody truly knows who this person is. There's a couple of people who have claimed to be him, but basically it's probably more of a hacking group that invented this, and they've been trying to remain anonymous. They still own like 6 million Bitcoins, so they're wealthy, but nobody knows who they are. And a lot of governments, just like the WikiLeaks guy, a lot of governments would love to know who this guy is so they could go in and learn how they can control Bitcoin. So basically, he or they invented, they used cryptography to create a currency, okay? And it's an instrument of exchange. There's 3 ways to look at it. And this is what the federal government is struggling with, okay? How do we perceive these digital currency, these cryptocurrencies? So the first thing they do is they came out and they said, well, it's an instrument of exchange, meaning it's a security. And then according to the federal government, if it's a security, you need to register with the SEC so that they can regulate it, okay? The next one is if it's a store of value. So Bitcoin and some Ethereum have actually been designated as currencies by the SEC, which means the SEC doesn't regulate it, but the Treasury may regulate it. So the federal government's still going to get their hands on it in some form or fashion. And then the last one is units of account. So this is basically a utility token. So kind of like, more like, it just allows you to transact digitally on a blockchain value. So it's not necessarily used as a currency. So and we were talking about medical records a little bit earlier. So if you wanted to give your specialist doctor access to your medical records that are on your primary care physician's electronic medical record, then a utility token would just track all of that, track the identity, track the authorization, then track the transactions that the doctor accessed the medical records. Okay, so you kind of understand utility in that scenario. And so Ethereum was basically built to be a utility-based blockchain system, and EOS also. And actually, there's hundreds of others. Everybody wanted to be designated as a utility token because then they felt the SEC would not regulate it. Okay. So Bitcoin is really, it's really difficult to transact with Bitcoin compared to some of the other cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin is really becoming more of a standard asset of value. So kind of like gold. So all the governments hoard gold because they believe that if everything goes to heck, then gold's going to become the standard again, right? So it's the only thing of value at the end of the day, and it's physical. And really all of these transactions just get embedded on a ledger. So everybody understands a ledger, credit, debit, and I'll actually show that in a second here. So this shows the market cap. So just from a cryptocurrency standpoint, so 2008, it was invented. Nothing, I mean, just a very small population of people were dealing with it and just trying to figure it out, supporting it. And then in 2016, it actually started becoming exchange for value. So there are people who are, like one guy sold or bought a pizza with 10,000 Bitcoin. That was like one of the first online transactions. And by January of last year, the market cap for all cryptocurrencies was almost $1 trillion. Does anybody know what the market cap for all publicly traded companies in the world is? It's about 221 trillion. So cryptocurrency still has a long way before it even looks on a blip from the standpoint of value in that space. Today, I think today it's dropped. So you saw it drop down. What we call the crypto winter. We don't call it a bubble because a bubble would have just put it, made it zero. But it's gone from Bitcoin was almost $20,000 per Bitcoin, and now it's down to around 4,000. But if you think about it, 10 years ago it was zero. So it's grown from zero to $4,000. It just had a big bump up and drop in the middle of that. So basically, blockchain is a cryptographic database maintained by a network of computers and each computer stores a copy of that database. And so here's the ledger. I won't go into the history of the ledger. It's more academic. But this is an illustration of what the blockchain, how it works, okay? I'm not going to get into all the algorithmic standpoint of it, but basically at the end of the day, so the first block is the Genesis block. So the Bitcoin's Genesis block was created in 2008. What happens is that they built an application that processes transactions, and those transactions then get embedded in a block, one block, okay? All that data then gets calculated in an algorithm to generate a hash, which is basically a really long number. And that really long number equals only the data that's in that block, okay? So if somebody were to go into that Genesis block and change it, then that hash number changes, okay? So what happens in the system, though, is that hash gets transferred and becomes a part of the next block. So technically, all the data that's in here gets embedded in the next block, okay? And then we add more data to that next block. All that's validated. There's a new hash that's created with all the new data plus what was in the first previous blocks, okay? And then that keeps going and going and going, okay? So in order to change, if you change, so now let's say we have 100 blocks. If you try to go back to any of the previous blocks and change anything, which you can, so and I'll talk about nodes and all that, but you've got the software on your computer, you can go in and change it, right? But then that's going to change the hash tag, that number. And so when that block then gets updated on the blockchain, everybody else's computer has this block on the system with this hashtag. If this hashtag doesn't match that hashtag, they're going to say this is not valid. Okay, so this is how the system creates immutability, meaning you can't change it. Whatever was before will always stay before because you just can't change it. And so this is why there's security built in to blockchain, which is how how Satoshi enabled Bitcoin to survive, because you can't do the double spend, okay? Because in the transactions it said, okay, this guy traded this coin for that product or whatever, or send it to that person. And that transaction is embedded here and you can't go back and change it. Okay, so that's how Satoshi solved the double spend problem. And there's a heck of a lot more detail to go along with that, but that's high level. Then we needed to have our computer system, right? So, your two views of the way that computers work, networks work, is you have a central server-based system, and then you have your peer-to-peer network, right? So a central-based system is like you have your dump terminals, and then you have one server, and then you're just accessing the data that's on the central server. In a peer-to-peer network, you can share data with multiple computers. And then we have centralized, decentralized, and distributed. And so there are different forms of blockchains that exist that leverage these three different ways of structuring your technology. So a centralized, again, is everything has to go through one place. Decentralized is there are nodes out there that then can connect to some other computers, right? But there's still lots and lots and lots of nodes, so that it is still a distributed network, but there are nodes that control a certain number of transactions. Most blockchain solutions are built upon the decentralized model. And then there's distributed, where every single computer that has the application on the system has the exact same copy of the network on that computer. And then each computer acts like a node, so all transactions will go through it. It's a little bit more intensive that way because now everybody has to process it. The Bitcoin is a decentralized one, so it's based on nodes, and then other computers connect to specific nodes. So what happens in a transaction? So basically somebody wants to transact with you, buy a book on Amazon. That transaction goes to the peer-to-peer network, through the network, goes to all the nodes that have the software with the algorithm to validate the transaction, which validates the transaction. Then once the transaction is verified, then that information starts to get embedded on the block, in a block. Okay, that block will then build up of verified transactions, and then when it hits a certain point, it depends upon it's all based upon how many bits it can hold in a particular block. And then once it's full, then it creates that hash tag, and then it's appended to the blockchain. Okay, and now, so this is the Genesis block, and we're at 1,000 blocks, and that one gets attached to it. And somebody could probably go into this block and possibly change information on it, but it's still duplicated on all these other computers. But as soon as a hash is created here and gets embedded in the next block, then it becomes immutable. Okay? And really nobody's, as far as we know, nobody has still been able to even crack that, the latest block appended to a blockchain. Okay? So I look at blockchain in three ways, and this is from a public view, Joe Plumber. It's either a cool form of something that doesn't exist today, like your snake oil salesman in the 1800s, to where it may be real or it may not be real, or it's a tremendous improvement in the way that we can do things today, which I liken the internet to that. So in healthcare, we adopted the internet to make medical records processing, claims processing more efficient, right? It didn't really change the business model, it just supposedly made it more efficient. Well, the way that I look at it is the fundamental change in the way we can conduct business, okay? And by creating a decentralized, especially if you're focused on the decentralized models, then you can disintermediate and take out the middleman. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But just as a side, countries are even doing this. They're looking at how they can disintermediate third parties like the United States. So Venezuela, everybody know that Venezuela's economy is basically tanked. They have sanctions against them from the United States, which means they can't sell their oil on the open market because all oil sales in the world are done through the US dollar. So the US has said, okay, anybody buying oil from Venezuela with US dollars, which they have to, then you can't do that. So what Venezuela did was they created a cryptocurrency based upon their oil reserves. They call it the petrodollar. It didn't work because nobody trusts Venezuela. But I mean, they're just in dire straits. So the other thing that's occurred in countries like Venezuela and North Korea is the population wants to get out from underneath the regime, especially when they know that the government can take their money. So what they do is they converted a lot of the early people that knew what was coming, converted their Venezuelan cash into Bitcoin and got it out of the country. Okay, the poor souls here, they didn't get to do that. So there's two versions of the blockchain. One's public. Basically, everybody can see it. Everybody can participate in it. All you have to do is download the blockchain application and process the algorithms of transactions, okay? And you can buy Bitcoin, and you can sell Bitcoin, and you can trade Bitcoin that way. It is expensive. One of the biggest complaints about Bitcoin is how much electricity it takes for these miners to execute these transactions and validate them. But again, it's distributed and nobody owns it. So there's a whole lot of other things we can talk about called 51% tax and all that. So, can one miner who is mining more than 51% of the blockchain change something? Maybe, but it hasn't been proven yet. But Bitcoin and Ethereum are both those. So, and then private blockchain. So these are going to be more corporate. So a company like JP Morgan, does everybody know that JP Morgan announced that they're going to create their own JP coin? So that will be a private cryptocurrency that's backed by JP Morgan. Okay, and the same one. So IBM and Maersk partnered up to create a blockchain solution for shipping. They've got their own tokenization within the system. They basically control that, which is why they're not successful, because the other shipping companies that compete with Maersk still don't trust it because Maersk's involved, right? And it's centrally controlled. But it's a lot lower cost because you can control how many nodes there are, and or even just have one central processor of all the transactions. It is more secure though. So here's all the different industries that we believe blockchain can change things. And this is what we've designed for Palmetto Chain. So you've got all these different industries, but in there you've got all these different use cases, from driver's license to property deeding to just basic commerce. Can all be placed in on a blockchain solution and remove the middleman. And I'll get to that. We'll do that now. So basically, here's an illustration of supply chain. So you got your farmer who's in the field. He sends his product to the silo guy, the collector. There's an exporter who's got to package it up and get it ready for shipping. You got the broker who's working the deals. You got the importer on the other side, even if you're going across just state lines. then you got the processor, the distributor, and then finally it gets to the restaurant. Okay, so there's opportunity for blockchain to disintermediate lots of that process. It might take a while before they get rid of all the middlemen, but like the broker, I mean, that's mostly just paper or phone calls, right? So this guy right here is probably the first one to go out of this method. Because you still need a collector for sure, you still need an end distributor, but all of these guys are at risk for being displaced, okay? And mining, I talked a little bit about mining, but this just shows you that there's guys that do mining operations out of their garage, and then in China and other places around the world are just humongous operations where, so they do mining, they're not just validating transactions, they're getting paid to validate the transaction. So according to what other algorithm they're working off of, whether it's Ethereum or blockchain or another one, will determine how much they get paid. But as soon as they hit a certain number of transactions and whoever gets them first, so they're competing with other mining operations. So they've got a block, they've got to process that whole block, and whoever processes that block first wins. And that mining operation gets paid Bitcoin for doing that. And then it gets appended to the blockchain. Okay? And then the other guys that wasted all their time, they lose. Right? So it's not the amount of energy going to just process that block from one miner, it's every miner is trying to process that block. And so there's an energy being expended all over the world for this kind of operation. Ethereum, we talked a little bit about. By the way, this kid, Vitalik, he was a teenager and he got involved with Bitcoin, I mean, like in 2012 or 2011 when he was a teenager. And he said, this is screwed up, man, I can do better than this. So he's the one who created Ethereum. He's like in his mid-20s now, or young 20s, doing quite well. But he's kind of since there's no Satoshi, he's kind of become the guru guy, okay? And then because he's smart and young. I do want to address smart contracts real quick. I want to jump into questions. So basically, on the blockchain, thank you. It says, here's what I found on smart contracts. So basically, a smart contract is not a legal document. It's basically an application. But it takes all the components of a legal document, embeds them, and then it also processes the transactions and validates them according to that contract. So this is where we could ultimately get rid of lawyers also. So the lawyer, you create the smart contract application. You don't need to have lawyers to tweak words and review everything because both parties have already agreed to it. And this is just standard, okay? And then you can go into the smart contract and then you can change a couple of things like, so in the healthcare, you can change the pricing of your services, that type of stuff. But the validations process is embedded and can't be changed. I pretty much hit all this. There was over 2,500 ICOs, initial coin offerings. So when you've got a cryptocurrency and you wanted to raise money, then you did an ICO to raise money. It's like going public, having an initial public offering. But it's unregulated. And this is the big problem that the SEC's had with all this. But lots and lots of money have been generated through ICOs. This just illustrates the percentage of populations in certain countries that are using it. And so here are the big guys. So IBM, Intel, I mean, all the big tech companies are now developing their own blockchain solutions. And now the financial institutions are in place. They're not, JP Morgan is the only one that I know that's creating their own token for right now. But most of these guys are all creating systems where they can control the trading of cryptocurrencies, okay? Because that's where all the money is. And now that they're legitimizing the system, their customers feel confident and then coming on board. Okay, so now the time is really good because with these companies backing the system, now you have a lot more comfort through the general population about whether it's viable or not. Okay, Universal Health Point is one of my projects. Basically, we want to revolutionize healthcare finance and payment. Everybody knows healthcare sucks in the United States. The service is great. The way it's provided and paid for is terrible. And I'll get through this real quick. Basically, this is the process. It takes anywhere between 15 days and 120 days to do this. Okay? It's terrible. And our solution basically will leverage smart contracts, technology, and utilize the Stellar protocol, which is a blockchain solution for payment, and get the doctor paid within 2.5 seconds. Okay? So before they provide the service to you, they're going to know that their funding is there. And then, because that's the way the smart contract is set up, it's almost kind of an escrow, but not truly an escrow. And then once the service has been validated, then they get paid immediately. Okay. And this is another one. Another idea is how to create an investment fund. And I know we want to get into questions, so I won't jump into this. Are there any questions now that I've been talking for 45 minutes? Yes?
Yeah, a little provocative, but I guess I'm not seeing the benefit of, okay, you eliminate those middlemen, those brokers and stuff like that. But then you have this whole huge operation of that like computer farm where all this energy and time and resources going into mining, creating the blocks, all that stuff. Seems like a wash, honestly.
Well, so all of this is being hashed out, to use a coin term, in that right now you're right. It might not necessarily be as efficient, but the end goal is to reduce or create efficiencies that then allow you to lower the cost of operations. So in healthcare, if we just did that, if we do that, if everybody in the United States was on a system like that, we'd knock out 35% of the cost of healthcare right then.
It seems like for certain industries it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Because we've overburdened it with technology anyway. So
well, and there's different types of blockchain solutions, right? So Bitcoin and Ethereum are pretty high cost from a processing standpoint, like you say. But there are others that are very low cost, and that's the reason they were created, and the reason they're being backed this project is because they've figured out a way to do what Bitcoin and Ethereum do, but least costly. Okay, so it's all an evolution, just like the same thing with the internet. I mean, when we first started, the internet got started. It was from one computer to another computer, and there was really no middleman in the beginning, except for the AT&T. Because they managed the packet transfer. But then you started building server farms, and all those middlemen started coming into play in order to supposedly make it more efficient and lay on that. So it's an evolution, but that's also definitely a concern to a lot of people. Yes.
Just from a practical sense, like in the healthcare market, if you're able to disintermediate in this way and make the transactions more efficient and have that 30 or more % savings, you would assume that savings gets passed on to the medical providers, right, the doctors and the physicians, and hopefully that will trickle down to what the patients are paying. If that's the case, I mean, and there are solutions in the marketplace that are providing this, I mean, how long do you realistically think this type of technology, how long will it take to have an impact on what people are paying for healthcare services? Like next 5 years or longer?
Well, so it won't impact you unless you're in a business model that leverages it. Okay? So for example, we're basically laying on top of our Universal Health Point platform what we call health cost sharing. So in the United States, health cost sharing is not an insurance product, but the members share the cost of healthcare. Okay? So you still contribute in a monthly amount. In the U.S., it's On average, a fully insured family of 4 pays $28,000, or is paying in some form or fashion $28,000 a year for coverage. Under a health cost sharing model, which currently exists, it's just not on a blockchain solution. The average is between $11,000 and $12,000 a year for a family of 4. So right off the bat, that business model already cuts out a lot of that. And then if we put it on a system like this and make it available to more people, then we'll hit that 35% target for the people involved in it, from the providers to the members in that system.
So with the healthcare sharing model that you're talking about, like what percentage of the American population, for instance, is using that model?
Right now, it's paper-based right now, but it's about 1.5 million people. So it's small.
Do you see the participation in that type of market increasing? And how?
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's already increasing, because now that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, no longer has an individual mandate, meaning you have to have insurance. They're leaving that system, the .gov system, because it costs too much. And so when they're looking for solutions, the only problem with, and it's not necessarily a problem because I'm a Christian, but the plans that are in the United States that currently qualify as an individual mandate for Affordable Care Act, they're all faith-based. So the reason why I created the Universal Health Exchange was because we wanted to make that model available to everybody.
So are you betting on the disintermediation of insurers?
I want United Healthcare and Blue Cross to go bye-bye.
How does that happen? How do you...
We just replace them because the consumers want this. It's all consumer driven. We're not going to depend on the government or anything like that to dictate it. We're going to do it through demand. And then that's how it's going to change.
And do you see that, obviously if individuals wanted this type of cost sharing to participate in that model versus going out and purchasing private insurance either through the marketplace or their employer, whatever, directly.
Right.
So if more individuals sign up for these types of cost sharing plans, then obviously the pressure for the government to participate in that is greater. So you foresee the government coming in and participating in this cost sharing system?
Yes.
Okay.
And the way that we see the employers, so in the United States, healthcare is driven by the employer just as much as it is by the government. The employer market follows the rules that the government sets through Medicare and Medicaid, but they still control as much, if not more, the dollar. So they'll, and if you're an employee of a large company, you know that they give you options. So the way that we see we get it into the employer market is being an option to start with. And then as more and more employees want that option, then more employers will adopt it. And I've been doing that type of stuff for 25 years. But that's just one solution. So you know, there's a whole bunch of other solutions that can be embedded on the blockchain or on a blockchain. Any more questions? Yeah. Sorry.
In terms of cryptocurrencies, the valuation being manipulated.
Yep.
Can you speak to that? For example, China's been criticized for manipulating the value of the dollar in terms of its trade with the United States. The valuations of Bitcoin have fluctuated quite a bit.
All right, so in regards to China and the U.S. dollar, it's usually they're manipulating the Chinese yuan compared to the U.S. dollar, so they're not changing the value. Even though they sold, they own $2.2 trillion worth of treasury bonds, and they sold 100 million treasury bonds last year. So they're starting to get rid of their treasury bonds. So the way that they could manipulate the U.S. dollar is by flooding the market with treasury bonds. But in regards to cryptocurrency, so the way that these things have been exchanged is through decentralized or unregulated exchanges. So you think of the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ that are regulated. These crypto exchanges are out there who are run by, in some cases, really good people, and in some cases, not really good people. And then, so there's always, so we're going back to the 1800s in regards to stocks. company stocks and what they used to do with company stocks back then, which is why the SEC was created in the first place. And so that's what these regulating bodies are working to do now, is get a whole handle on that, so that there isn't that type of, in their mind, illegal activity.
And then another question about the application of blockchain. Alibaba is actively integrating it into the marketplace. What other applications do you see as easily transitioning to blockchain? For example, ERP systems, since they are ERP systems.
Right. Yeah. So, well, IBM is really pushing the supply chain through shipping. But a lot of supply chain organizations are really adopting it because it helps solve that middleman problem in some form or fashion, but it also creates immutability. So there's a lot less fraud that happens in that process. So even if they can't get rid of a couple of the middlemen, it does reduce the fraud. We're talking to the UN on a project in regards to, so pharmaceutical companies donate drugs to go to Africa. One of the biggest problems that happens is it gets aggregated here, actually in Savannah, put on a container, shipped to Africa. They kind of know what it's doing between here and there, but as soon as it hits Africa, shrinkage starts to occur. And so how can we track that? And then through cryptocurrency, create incentives to reduce the shrinkage. Because the reason there's shrinkage, right, is they're taking the drugs and they're selling it, and they're making money. So if along the chain you can create incentives to not shrink, then there'll be a higher population of people in Africa who actually receive the donated drugs. And then the pharmaceutical companies are happy about it because now they're benefiting more people than what they used to.
So it provides a chain of custody.
Correct. But that goes with driver's license and property deeds. So probably a problem you have here in Savannah is one we have in Charleston. It's called heirs property. So this is when, after the Revolution, large tracts of land were given to slaves. They weren't deeded necessarily, and then they didn't know who of the slaves. So the slaves got it, but then there was a whole group of slaves, right? So now these whole tracts of land in South Carolina that are designated for a specific quote-unquote family that trace back to the slaves, but they've been, for the last 150 years, they've been living on this land thinking they owned it, but there's no deeding, they haven't cut it up and all this kind of stuff, so they can't sell it. Is really the main thing that happens now, is because one of the, because then you buy deed insurance, is that what you call it? The insurance company isn't going to cover it because there's no clear title insurance. And so it's not a big deal here in the United States, but in every other country where there could be a dictator, just like in Cuba, when Fidel took over, kicked all the rich people out, took their land, they have no proof because he burned all the records, right? So they have no way to prove that they own that property. But if it had been embedded on a blockchain and it was immutable, then as soon as the regime is gone and there's a new government, they can come back and they can claim that land. And then the other thing about that is people can't bank. So if you don't have property, you can't prove you have property. Most banks don't even let you open up a bank account, especially in those countries, because there's nothing for them to claim back to. So now, and that then helps the unbanked. Yeah.
Mining, you talk about, that there's either it's going to create an incentive, either through creation or getting paid to when they create some Bitcoin.
Right.
But the purpose of it, though, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, is to validate the system.
Correct. Yeah, that's what they're getting paid, to validate the transactions.
Is there some, I guess in a, I'll say utopian way, but sort of like we have apps like Holding at Home, Steady at Home, these distributed models to solve problems, is to where ideally that's the way it would be done on, every digital device would just be validating these blockchains?
Yeah. So the Bitcoin system was created that way, but there's all these other blockchain and cryptocurrency models out there already. They just, because of the crypto winter and everybody getting disillusioned by what happened, they haven't become prominent. But there's a lot of different use cases and a lot of different ways to do it. And so the mining operation could actually, and we were talking about this, and I apologize for bringing up the faith thing, but in order to share the word, you could incentivize Christians to share the word, right? So all you would need on your mobile app is a way to share it and prove that you shared it, and then you could get incentivized for that. So the tokens within it acts just like the Delta Flyer, frequent flyer points, except hopefully you actually can use the daggone things. But yeah, so technically that way to where you don't have, the mining is not really mining, you're just getting paid. So mining is proof of use, and you can have proof of stake, or you could create other ways to do the mining or manage the transactions. Yeah.
As I understand it, there's a maximum number of Bitcoin that can exist.
Yeah, 21 million.
What happens when we get there?
I think that's not going to happen for 2141.
That's quite soon.
Well, no, relative to the thing, but
But do all the currencies have these limits? And if so, it doesn't seem to be a feasible economic model.
yeah, so who knows what's going to happen, which is one reason why Bitcoin is kind of held up as the gold standard, is because even after it hits the end date, then it's all going to be based upon supply and demand, even then. So if there's people who still believe it has value, and I mean, there are people who are predicting that each Bitcoin's, they're going to reach $1 million worth of per Bitcoin at some point.
But if mining exists to incentivize people to transact, to validate.
So because the value is